Hi, this is Chrissy Incognito, and welcome to another episode of my show. Now, you might be wondering why I'm incognito. This is my alter ego that can say things that I cannot otherwise say unless I was incognito. So, thank you for returning. In order to understand more about this episode, view the previous episode. Happy listening. So, finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I had had it. I had absolutely had it with it all being about her being a boundary violator, her shaming if you didn't agree with her. So the problem is, anytime I brought this up to Karen, like if I said, Karen, you're such a, like, let's just say for argument's sake, I didn't use these words, but this is where I was going with this. Let's say I said to Karen, you're such a boundary violator, like I asked you not to do this and you did this. Well, she would be like, well, you think you're so perfect. So basically, the conversation would be, I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I? That's the extent of the conversation. And at that point, you get so annoyed. Like, what do you say to that? Like, I'm trying to have a conversation with you. And I remember one time I said to her, honestly, I don't think she knows how to defend herself or even to explain it. That's not my problem. One time I was like, defend yourself. I asked you not to do that, whatever it was. And I said, you went ahead and do it. I said, you are aggravated that I'm calling you on it. I said, you think you're so right? Explain yourself. Like, I'm not doing this with you. I was like, I'm not being mad. I said, I just explained my side of it. You need to explain your side. Just wouldn't do it. She wouldn't do it because I think her perception was completely different than reality. So if you really believe this other person is 100% wrong and you're 100% right, where do you even start? What do you even say? And one of our fights, I realized that her perception was not accurate, was not reality. And the same thing happened with my sister, one of our last fights that we had, because you're arguing like the person is normal and rational and somewhat healthy, right? Like somewhat. And one of the last fights I had with my sister, I realized she's not being difficult. Her perception is completely skewed and accurate and over in left field. And that's part of the personality disorder. It infiltrates your entire perception, schema of life, everything. So one of the reasons why they're so difficult, the borderline, is because they're needy, they're demanding. I don't think their perception is accurate. Because I remember my sister and I were fighting, and she said something, and like a light bulb went off. And I was like, you don't have accurate perception. For what I don't remember what it was, but for what you just said, this is why we fight, because you're not in reality. You are in your own perception, which is not reality's perception. So I realized that with Karen, like all of our like fights were basically like, you think you're so perfect. And I was like, let's have a conversation. And it was basically, I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I? And then I was like, I challenged her. I was like, listen, I said my piece. I want to hear you think you're so right. You think you're so valid in with the actions you do. I said, explain it. I said, like I said, I can explain why I believe I'm right and accurate in what I'm talking about. She just wouldn't do it. She just kept shaking her head. She's like, "Ah." And I was like, no, I'm like, I'm not being confrontational, Karen. I said, I want to hear your explanation because I don't understand. And I said, you don't understand my explanation, like why I'm being a bitch, because that's what she would always call me when she didn't get her way. You're such a bitch. I'm like, okay, you're still not doing whatever it is that boundary violator. I'm using words now, but basically that was my action back in the day. She would always call me a bitch whenever I put her in her place. And I don't mean being mean. I didn't have to be, but again, when I said, no, we're not doing that, or you're not doing that, you know, whenever I put a boundary or restrictions on her, she would come back at me and say, "You're such a bitch. You're so not flexible. You're so," again, it was blame shifting, sorry. So all I could respond to that is, okay, I'm a bitch. It's not going to change. That makes me a bitch. That's a bitch. Later on in life, I realized is because I was putting boundaries on a boundary violator. That's why I was a bitch, because it didn't follow up with, you know, you you were cursing at me, you were screaming, like there was nothing other than I told her no. But I remember one day, it was one of the many men she was fucking at that time, and I don't know what was happening. And we were talking, whatever it was we were talking about, and she's like, "Yeah, I don't really like the word no." And it wasn't just like I didn't take that as like she just wanted to be a spoiled brat and get what she wanted. It was borderline. That's why. That's why. So another time, she had a friend for years, okay? And she was one of these stockpile friends. And what I mean by that is that she didn't see her often, but if she came around, she became the priority because you're a safe bet that she can contact and have. This person I don't see. So when all of these regular people can't be, I need more supply. I need more, to be an emotional vampire on other people. Okay. So she was one of, and met the woman. She was nice, um, she was she was one of these this friend was one of the pile friends of Karen. It's just my word for it. And the friend, evidently, the friend told her something very, com- um, very personal and a very touchy thing. Okay, she just, she told me what it was. I don't want to get into it, but this friend told Karen something very personal and very touchy, like you might not want to talk about it. Okay. Karen got it in her head that you need to talk about this. Don't you think this is the reason why you're having issues? And so at first, again, the poor friend thought Karen was normal. And what would you do to a normal person that was kind of pushing the issue? You would simply remind them, for the most part, no, I really don't want to talk about that. Right. So what does Karen do? I feel like you should talk about it. Me, Karen, feels like this is the crux of your problem and you should be talking about it because how could this devastating thing not affect you? So the friend must have given her few warnings and then Karen pushed the issue. The friend hung up on her and didn't talk to her for 2 years. Okay. Me, a friend for over 30 years, haven't talked to her in years because of the same boundary violating type of things. Okay. Our mutual friend, who again, she was starting to know Karen, so she didn't understand the full gravity of how insulting and annoying Karen is. Um, so again, the friend said to her husband would always say to her, like, because what would happen is Karen would always cause problems in her life. She would either say stuff that like just incited people to be upset or annoyed with her. But she's like, no, I refuse to keep my mouth shut. It's not like she was insulting like you're a fucking piece of shit. That's not what Karen did. But it was just something like was kind of touchy, or she would just push the envelope always. So um kind of like with the pencil example, like the friend maybe warned her, like, okay, you can have this one, but I'm really going to need this for other. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. So our mutual friend was getting to know Karen. So I tried to tell her how she was. She's like, no, no, she's just telling it how whatever it is. I was like, okay. I said, you seem less tolerant than I do. So I'm just warning you. And she was giving her the benefit of the doubt because she didn't know Karen, and this mutual friend was a nice person. And I said, listen, you you love the pandemic. You think the pandemic was the best thing, so you never had to look at anybody or talk to anybody. Okay. So you're really intolerant to people. Okay. She was just a loner. She was like a cat woman, a crazy cat lady. I'm a little bit more tolerant, but after a while, it's like I can't take it anymore. Okay. So I said to her, listen, this was the same girl that Karen on the three-way. Karen would go on and on and on whatever it was. And as soon as the friend said something, Karen would be like, "Oh, somebody's at my door. I gotta go." And she would just run off. Okay. And the friend kept saying, every single fucking time I go to say something, she cuts me. I was like, welcome to Karen. Okay. So one day, the mutual friend was over Karen's house. And again, Karen was going on and on about a situation that Karen created because she couldn't either take no for an answer or she couldn't shut her mouth. Okay. And so she would always get into these situations. I just was like, whatever. Um, Her husband would say, you just talked about this for 3 hours. We're not talking about this anymore. And when he didn't want to talk about it, he would run up to the bedroom, lock the door, and Karen would be bang. She told me this. I didn't know any of this. She would be banging, let me in. We're not done with this. Why are you telling me I can't? Why are you running away from me? Don't you want it? Okay. I told her from day one they weren't compatible. But anyway, so she's sitting watching TV with the Karen sitting there, with the, friends watching a movie TV show, and Karen starts going on and on and on about the same nonsense, how she probably insulted someone or alienated somebody, and she can't believe they acted like that, and now they're not talking to her, and blah, 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 and our mutual friend said, "We're not talking about this." And she said, "Maybe we're not talking about this. We're friends. This is what we do. We talk about our problems. We talk about our lives." And the mutual friend said, "We're not talking about this." And Karen went on and on and on. And the mutual friend got up and left. Okay. Then later on, I heard both sides of the story, and I know how it goes. I know how it goes. Like, I never walked out on Karen. Okay. So I knew our mutual friend was very not tolerant of this kind of Karen crap. I never just got up and walked out, whether I lived close or whether I lived far away. Okay. I said, I told you. I said, I told you how she is. I said, you either have to accept it or not have anything to do with her because there is no in the middle. And of course, Karen was like, "Can you believe all I was doing was trying to tell my friend about the situation." And all of a sudden, in the middle of nowhere, she got up, she waved her hand, and she walked out. Now I know what happened because our friend told me that she told her we're not talking about this because we keep going round and round and it goes nowhere. So if you want to talk about something else, we'll talk about it. And Karen started to shame her. "What do you mean? This is what friends do. We all talk about our life. I would listen to your blah, 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 blah." Okay. So, present day. Um, the last time I talked to her, I'm sorry, we were in a restaurant. She insulted me, which is not even relevant. I said, "We're done here." I got up and I walked out and I went home and I wrote her an email and I said, "The reason why we can't discuss this either in person or over the phone is because you have such difficulty taking responsibility for your actions. And I realize your actions are never going to change. So I need to change. I wish you good luck." I said, "but I can't deal with you anymore." I probably went into a little bit more detail than that. That was the gist of it. She never wrote back. I said to her, If you write me back, I probably won't read it or respond to it. I said, I wish I couldn't do it like this, but I'm not going back and forth with you of how I shouldn't do this and I shouldn't feel this way and how you take no responsibility. Okay. I did the same thing to my sister, the same exact thing. Like, there's no talking to you. We're not going anywhere. I've changed. You're not going to take any responsibility, and I'm done here. Okay. So, present day.